day, good morning, good afternoon. It's Roger Roadside here saying hello. Hello. This is going to be a little quick video. It's not really, let's face it, it's probably going to be about 10 minutes. But I just wanted to throw it out there. I'm going to pose this question, and it's probably going to sound awkward. It'll probably read better than what it sounds. But the question is thus. Multiculturalism works, comma, right, upward inflection, question mark. That's essentially the question. I'm asking whether, does multiculturalism actually work in today's day and age? Because, look, this is a bit of a difficult one to unpack, and it can be a little bit of a minefield. So I don't want it to make it seem like something that it's not, but so I'll try to frame it up as best as I can. I feel like for the first 20 odd years of my life, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, things in society were a certain type of way, and culturally, back at home in Oz, obviously. We were really proud of being Aussies, and we were really, we loved our country. Well, we loved our country, and we loved what it stood for, and we loved what we stood for. And as the years went on, and like, don't get me wrong, I say that even by saying that we were already multicultural back at that point in time, even when I was growing up. I went to school, primary school, and to high school with tons of other kids of different nationalities, Serbians, Croatians, Filipinos, Asians, Chinese, Vietnamese, there were just, Maltese, Italian, Greek. There were multiple different nationalities, and we were always taught that, yes, we are Australian, and those that live in Australia can call themselves Australian. If that's where they're going to be settling their life, then you become an Australian, and these are the things that make you Australian. Having a barbecue and being relaxed, and being one with nature, and being adventurous, and going down to the beach, and those sort of things are Australian. And we were proud of those things. I mean, that's scratching the surface, and that's not the only things that make us Australian. But you get what I mean. It was sort of, people were aware that what it was to be Australian, and more often than not, those that did immigrate over to Australia would go on to do those things. They'd slip, slop, slap. They'd go down to the park and have a barbecue on the provided barbecues there. They'd have a couple of tinnies. They'd get involved in the Melbourne Cup. They would they would get involved with everything. And anyway, long story short, I guess there are probably various things that in this day and age you'd probably turn your nose up to, or go, that's probably not the best way of looking at things. But in hindsight, there's also quite a lot of things back in that time that, I don't know, maybe seemed a lot more commonsensical than what they are now. There seems to be, I just remember, I think when I was in my 20s, that there was this sudden thing of being mindful of what you said and how you said things. And look, I'm just going to throw it out there, and look, I could be 100% wrong, but it kind of feels like the first thing, and look, again, this is a difficult thing to talk about, and it's not to say that I was going out there using these words at all, because I wasn't, but it kind of feels like, I can vaguely remember the first time when it was sort of like, really, you can never say the N-word. And again, I preface that by saying I never said it, and I never hung around people that said it, but it was just sort of a common sense thing that you just didn't say it. But there was also, but I remember this transition, this time whereby, one of the things you definitely cannot do is you cannot say the N-word, which again, to me, felt like a common sense thing. But, to me, that sort of started to introduce this whole political correctness. And I introduced that. I say that by saying, not that I disagree with that there shouldn't be political correctness. I 100% believe that there should be. I guess my only thing is that over the last decade or so, it feels like those above us, the government, the politicians and all sorts of stuff, have been ramming multiculturalism down our throat, and how it's better for the country, and it's better for the economy, and it's better for the arts and culture, and it just enriches us, this transfer of information and knowledge, and we're all striving together, and we're all doing this, and we're working together as teams, and we're exchanging ideas and cultural themes and ideologies and all sorts of stuff. That seems to be the buzzwords in regards to why multiculturalism works or would work. And on the surface, on the philosophy of it, I get, I appreciate that. But I feel like over the last 20 odd years that no one's ever done or talked about or implemented how you actually integrate that into society, like structurally. How do you do that? How do you make sure that there is that transfer of wisdom, there is that cultural transfer or that cultural exchange? Because I don't feel like that's been done, which then means that and examples that you see over here in Britain is whereby in a lot of places, whether it be Luton, whether it be Birmingham, whether it be Edmonton, whether it be Ilford, whether it be Tower Hamlet, there are various parts of the UK, various parts of London and outside of London, where communities and nationalities have brought up, stuck a flag in the ground, and people have sort of rallied around that flag, and then sort of, suddenly those areas then become, Little India or Little Asia, or this is a heavily populated Muslim area, or this is a heavily populated Caribbean area. I get it. When I first came over to the UK, I came over here not knowing anyone, not really knowing how things worked. I knew that it roughly worked similar to Oz, but there's obviously a lot of differences. So my very first instinct was to go to where all the Aussies were, and to live with Aussies, and to socialise with Aussies, so that I could then tap into their knowledge about how things work over here. How do you book holidays? What holidays would you book? What countries are you going to? What pubs are you going to? What's the nightlife over here? Where do you go for that? Where do you go for this? What happens if you need to get a filling in your teeth? Where do you go for? I know that you go to a dentist. I'm not an idiot, but where do you go for that? This, that, and the other. So you end up, well, I ended up coming over here, but immediately, sniffing out other Aussies, and using them as my social crutch, so to speak. And so I get it. I get that if you're immigrating over here, or if you're if you're doing a journey similar to mine, where you're coming over here and you don't really know anyone. I mean, I'll be brutally honest with you. For about the first 2 or 3 years, I could probably say hand on heart that I didn't really have someone from the UK who I would consider a really good mate, because most of my mates were Aussies and Kiwis. So I get it. I get that, when Turkish people come over, when people from the Middle East come over, when Chinese people come over, when Filipino people come over, I get that you gravitate towards your own, people of your own tribe, so to speak. And then invariably what happens is that you then have areas of London, areas of the UK that then become very largely populated of people from those cultures. You look at Palmer's Green and Richmond Hill now. There's a very big Turkish community there, which is not a bad thing, but it's what invariably ends up happening is that then most, if not all, of the retail side of the fence comes heavily skewed towards the Turkish community because there's a lot of Turkish people there. Makes sense. But then for indigenous Brits that are living there, suddenly the place that they grew up in, the English pub is now converted into a Turkish barber's. The English cafe that used to do bubble and squeak and a fry up, reasonably priced fry up, is now a Greek cafe where there's a lot of like a Turkish cafe, for example, which means there's a lot of blokes in puffer jackets sitting out the front having chain smoking cigarettes. And that's just the way, and that's the transformation that's happened. And I think that is where you get a lot of indigenous people that say, well, multiculturalism doesn't work. It just leads to the British way, the British culture being slowly evaporated and slowly eroded. And then the people above us, the politicians and the government and all sorts of stuff, they obviously strongly disagree with that because they look at the spreadsheets and they say, listen, as a country, we've got X amount of percentage of Jews, we've got X amount of percentage of Filipinos, we've got X amount of percentage of people from the Caribbeans, from Africa, from here, there and everywhere. Look at how amazing we are. We're multicultural and the country just works and it's great, isn't it? So there's a disconnect because when you look at it from a very much a zoomed out level, then 100% I understand that. Okay, great, it's great. We've got so many people from different sort of backgrounds here, but on a ground level, when you don't have any structure in place to say, hang on, multiculturalism works when we've got person A who comes from a certain background living next to person B who comes from a different, certain background, who lives next to person C who comes from a different certain background, who lives next to person D who comes from a rather than actually what's just happened is now most of the British people have sort of cleared out of here, and now 80% of the people in this designated area are Turkish or Croatian or African or whatever. It doesn't matter who they are, but once it starts becoming heavily populated with one culture or even one religion or one way of life, then everyone else who's not of that religion or way of life then suddenly naturally feels like it's being taken over. So I don't think enough people sort of understand that or comprehend that it's all well and good to say multiculturalism is the way forward and and should be something that we strive for. And I think fundamentally on a fundamental level, I think no one would really disagree with that. And even if you listen to a lot of the really what's described as the really far righters, even if you look at the people from like Tommy Robinson and stuff like that, if you actually listen to the words that they say, they don't necessarily disagree with having people from other cultures within the country. They don't disagree with having people from other walks of life or other ideologies or anything like that. It only starts becoming a problem whereby people from other cultures and other walks of life come in and essentially start taking over a location or an area of land or a suburb or a town. And then what invariably happens is, okay, maybe 70% of that community might just keep their head down and might go out and have a fry up and eat the odd spotted dick and have a cup of tea and watch X Factor and all that sort of stuff. But there'll also be a number of people that, you know, might identify the fact that they make up the majority in that area, and so then they'll try to utilize that to, you know, enforce their ideologies or their way of life or anything like that. And then suddenly you've got these people shouting from the rooftop saying, well, and we had instances like that, didn't we? We had examples of that in Tower Hamlet where you've got people from a certain race or from a certain religion saying that this is their town, this is their area, which then obviously rubs certain people up the wrong way, doesn't it? Because it's not. You're in the country of the United Kingdom. There's no this is your town. It's only, you may feel like that because there's a lot of people who you identify within that area, but it's still not categorized as, you know, you're not a country within the country. So look, anyway, long story short, I just want to pose the question: multiculturalism. I think that fundamentally, it's a great ideology. The ideology of everyone, you know, throwing away, you know, maybe being proud of their heritage and being proud of their history and being proud of, you know, the patch of dirt that they were born on, you know, the wonderful things that may have happened on that patch of dirt over the last however many centuries, but also to some extent putting that aside and saying, you know, but at the end of the day, even though you were born on a different patch of dirt, we're still the same. We're still just humans. We're still just, you know, people that realistically have 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, you know, a few fingers and a few toes, and, you know, essentially we're exactly the same. We might look a little bit different. You might have a tan. I might be pale as all hell. You might have, you know, certain features that I don't have. You know, you might have red hair. I might have jet black hair. But essentially, we still got hair for the most part, and we're still just humans. So on that level, we should all treat each other and respect each other with the same level of respect, regardless of what we believe in or what our sexuality is, or what God we pray to, or whether we pray to a God at all, or you know, how we choose to live our life. As long as it's not directly impacting on us, on anyone else, then in my eyes there shouldn't be any problems. But we seem to have these problems, don't we? We seem to still have people living in the UK who, you know, the sheer fact that we've got protest marches about atrocities and things that are happening, you know, on the other side of the world, or not necessarily on the other side, but still in other countries. And fair enough. Look, if everyone protesting was of that sort of persuasion, I'd sort of get it. But we don't have that, do we? But fundamentally, going back, I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole there. Fundamentally, I think that multiculturalism is a great idea. I just don't think we're implementing it correctly. I think there's, you know, I don't know what the answer is, don't get me wrong, but I know that the answer isn't what we're currently doing. The answer isn't the politicians ramming it down our throat that multiculturalism works and it's the best thing ever since sliced bread. But then, you know, on the ground level, on the surface level, you know, what are you doing to make sure that we don't just have, you know, this town or this place? I mean, I want to say taken over, but it's not necessarily a factor that's taken over. I get why communities and why people gravitate towards each other, but obviously when that happens, then you get a place that, 10 years ago was a different sort of landscape communally than what it is now. And then invariably what happens is that once you have a larger amount of people from that community within a lot of people from that nationality or from that religion within that community, once that continues to grow and grow and grow, then naturally you need to service those people in that community. So therefore, obviously more religious places get agreed to be knocked up, and more places on the retail high street that might sell traditional clothes and stuff like that are indigenous for those people. To me that makes common sense, that if you just have a concentrated area that's got a lot of people from the same sort of walks of life, whether they be Hindu, Filipino, American, German, whatever, then it makes sense that at some point in time, then they're going to want that community to reflect the majority of people within that community, which then means that anyone indigenous to that place feels as though that place that their culture has been eroded, has been evaporated, which it has. So my point is, and I apologise for going around the houses a little bit, but it's just a little bit hard to talk about without sort of being seen as being racist or anything like that. But I guess my point is that I believe in multiculturalism, but I just don't believe that we're going about it the right way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with that? Do you not agree with that? Do you, if you agree with that, idea that you would like there to be multiculturalism, but you would like it to be in a way that it doesn't, totally evaporate the indigenous culture of the country that's in. It's the same as, China. I lived over in China for 6 months or so. I lived over in South Korea for 6 months or so. Both those countries are very heavily protect their culture. It's very heavily protected, and to a point whereby effectively, whilst there are some people, whilst there are Westerners and there are people that are from different sort of walks of life, really, if I was going to answer the question, is China a heavily multicultural place? I'd probably say no, it's not. And I get why, because China don't bend over backwards to please people. So, if I was about to immigrate there and there was loads of Aussies immigrating there, in 5 years, I would think that if I made a request to have an Aussie pub, built or something like that, I'd probably get told a sharp no, and that would be it. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, get your thoughts below. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that multiculturalism in its current form works? And if so, how does it work? Besides the buzzwords, besides it enriches our culture, there's an exchange of artistic impression, there's an exchange of wisdom, there's an exchange of knowledge, it's a boost to the economy, this, that and the other. If we didn't have immigration, then who would be doing all these jobs and stuff like that? Well, I mean, I understand it, yeah, I get that there's potentially a lot of people from certain communities and certain backgrounds that are filling up quite a lot of jobs at the moment, but my argument to that would be, well, if they weren't there, someone would act, someone else would do it. It's not, I don't necessarily think that, for example, and I don't know, I'm not going to give an example, because then you give an example and that could be deemed as being judgmental, but just as an example, as a weird example, all right, doctors. Like, I don't necessarily think that, if we didn't have, I'm just going to make one up. So Swedish. Let's say a load of Swedish people were doctors here in the UK. So you make the argument to say, well, if you didn't allow Swedish people to come over here, then you wouldn't have as many doctors in the NHS, would you? My point would be someone else would take up those roles. Like if we didn't have enough people doing those roles, I'm sure there'd be some sort of incentive down the line to get people trained up and educated into those areas. You know, there might be some sort of cash incentive or salary incentive, or I don't know, something. But anyway, long story short, you know what I mean, hopefully. What are your thoughts? Get them in below. I would like to read them, and yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Apologies if this is a bit of a long-winded conversation, but it's just it's a difficult one to talk about without potentially, again, you know, this is the society that we've built up, isn't it? It's a society whereby, you know, you're petrified of saying the wrong thing, or potentially saying that, you know, something that could be deemed as you know, something that the intention isn't for that to be. So anyway, if you like the video, if you like the channel, make sure you support it, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like the video. I've said all that. Listen, this is Roger Roadside saying ciao for now. I've now got to work out how the blooming hell I'm going to get my phone from the other side of the seat in a manner. I obviously can't do it whilst I'm driving, so now that I've stopped, I've got to do it in a manner whereby, there we go, all right, ciao.